While two young men were spending time together, one of their phones rang. Though the man attempted to answer it, his partner forbade him from doing so. Kang Taesung reminded the brunette of his promise not to be distracted, and thus, the protagonist reluctantly agreed and put the phone aside. Soon, it rang again, compelling Shi-yoon to answer it. As the brunette was one of the best doctors at the clinic, he was asked to come in for an extra shift immediately. He couldn't refuse and was forced to leave his partner alone. This news greatly angered the blonde, as he wanted to celebrate their anniversary together. The man, however, believed that saving lives was more important than their plans, and thus hurried to the shower. The young man knew his lover's words were true, yet he still felt a sense of melancholy. For romantic feelings and desires seemed no less significant to him. Suddenly his phone rang as well. The caller implored Taesung to participate in the evening race, though the blonde had refused several times, as he had no plans to compete that day. Now a new reason emerged to convince him: the director's request. Ultimately, this fact became decisive, and he had to agree. The ruined plans for their special day deeply saddened the young man. Shortly after, the racer arrived at the competition venue. The attention of most fans of the sport was solely focused on the blonde. He was renowned for his skills, having not lost more than 25 consecutive races. Even with little time left before the race, Taesung remained calm, taking time to text his lover who hadn't responded. The partner's ignoring of notifications greatly angered the young man, but he had to prepare for the race. When the countdown began, he was fully focused on the race. From the very first seconds, Racer Sin took the lead, surpassing his rivals. This action captivated the enthusiastic fans, who watched everything from the stands. Soon, participant number 2 began trying to overtake him. Nevertheless, the blonde was confident in his abilities and thus accelerated. Towards the end of the race, he still led and had every chance of winning. Yet unexpectedly, his phone vibrated with a notification. As soon as Taesung heard it, he noticeably slowed down. It was clear that his beloved was more important to him than the race. On the final turn, the athlete tried to reclaim the lead by performing a dangerous maneuver. Surprisingly, he managed to pull it off, though the rival did not fall behind. When there was very little distance left to the finish line, many spectators noticed something wrong with Racer Sin's wheel. Despite this, he continued driving until his tire burst. Due to this complication, participant number 2 won the race. This news greatly upset all the sports fans, as they deemed it an unfair victory. Nevertheless, the defeated athlete didn't care. He only wanted to see the notification he had received earlier. Picking up the phone, the blonde was disappointed as the message was not from his beloved. Upon realizing this, he felt the bitter disappointment of having missed the chance to win the race earlier. A little later, when the event had ended, Taesung personally approached the man who had earlier tried to coerce him into participating. The stern man was furious over the boy's loss, as the company's director, previously mentioned, had lost a significant amount of money betting on Racer Sin. The blonde, however, remained utterly calm, as he was indifferent to others' expenditures. Moreover, he had initially not wanted to compete that day and thus did not feel responsible. The athlete's confident demeanor and indifference to the situation further infuriated the director's subordinate. What angered him most was the racer's arrogant attitude toward him, prompting the stern man to try to prove he should not be treated so. Nevertheless, Taesung was well aware that he brought more benefits than losses to the organization and the director himself, and thus behaved as he pleased. In the next moment, he struck the interlocutor across the face for his impudence. The young man intended to continue beating the scoundrel, but was distracted by a phone call from his beloved. The timely call delighted the blonde, so he left the employee alone and walked away. Picking up the phone, Racer Sin heard that the protagonist had finished work for the day and planned to head home. Upon learning this, the athlete decided to personally pick up and take the doctor home, so they could spend a bit more time together. A little later, the two young men were driving. The brunette looked very tired from overworking. During a casual conversation between the partners, Shi-yoon accidentally noticed marks on his lover's hands. He immediately realized that he had been racing again. Though the young man tried to lie about it, the man soon made him tell the truth. It was quite evident that the doctor disliked the fact that the athlete constantly risked his life for the races. Previously, Taesung had promised not to do so anymore, but had broken the agreement. The protagonist was angry, but his partner's anger was stronger. Thus, he pointed out that he wasn't the only one who had broken their mutual agreements that day. With that, the conversation ended, as both were at fault. Soon, the two young men were at the apartment. While the brunette slept, Racer Sin admired his serene face during slumber. Of course, he loved the man deeply and cherished every moment with him. Late at night, Shi-yoon had a nightmare related to his work. It was so horrific that the unfortunate doctor began to talk deliriously in his sleep, simultaneously calling for his beloved's help. Waking up from the nightmare, the brunette was scared by the fact that his partner was not beside him. He then called out to him again, but louder. As it turned out, the young man was cooking in the kitchen at the time and was very surprised when he realized he was being called. Almost immediately, Taesung guessed that his beloved had had a nightmare. It seemed this happened quite often. In the next moment, the protagonist pulled the athlete close and kissed him. It seemed that he was trying to dispel his recent fear and distract himself. Of course, the blonde didn't have the heart to refuse the man he loved so much, so the two young men immediately engaged in intimate activities together. In that moment, Taesung wanted to know if the doctor loved him and thus asked him directly. To his surprise, Shi-yoon said nothing. The silence greatly alarmed the young man, as he wanted his feelings to be reciprocated. Nevertheless, he had to continue their intimate contact without further questioning. Right after this, Racer Sin decided to have a more serious conversation with the protagonist about it. He repeated his question about love once more, but again received no answer. The man silently went to the shower, ignoring what he had heard, as if the truthful answer might upset Taesung. Left alone, the blonde realized this and was obviously disheartened. To avoid feeling too sad, he tried to pretend he didn't care. When the brunette went to the shower, he pondered his partner's words. He didn't quite understand why it was so important for him to hear about love directly. These thoughts forced Shi-yoon to recall his childhood. Once, as a child, he spent time outdoors with his family and beloved dog. He was very happy and thus played carefree, having no problems in life. However, soon his joy was interrupted by his mother's announcement. She told the brunette that his father was going away on a business trip again. This news greatly upset him, though it seemed his mother was also saddened by it. During the ensuing conversation between his parents, it became known that despite it being his wife's birthday, the protagonist's father would not be able to come home early and celebrate with them. Then, the head of the family convinced everyone that his work was more important than any fun or celebrations, as he was saving lives. Though his wife believed and understood this, only Shi-yoon knew the whole truth. He was well aware that his father was lying to his family. Standing in the shower under the hot stream, the protagonist recalled some moments from his past with resentment and sadness. He remembered overhearing his father talking to his mistress, confessing that he had lied to his wife and child about a business trip to spend time with her. The family head called his deceit a true act of love for the woman. Betraying his family, he left his son disillusioned with romantic feelings for life. The next day, the young man waited for the doctor to finish work so they could go home together again. He was furious as Shi-yoon had once again worked overtime, causing another delay. Racer Sin seethed with anger over his beloved's exhaustion and the lack of time spent together. Nevertheless, the blonde understood that being a surgeon was a crucial profession and was willing to wait as long as necessary. Until very late, Taesung sat on a bench outside the hospital entrance. Gradually, his anger turned to disappointment and bewilderment over the recent situation with the question about love. Moreover, the athlete recalled other unpleasant moments in his life with the brunette. One of these was when the man refused intimate contact due to overwork, leaving the young man with no choice but to accept it. He suddenly began to realize that their intimate moments only happened when it was convenient for his partner. Racer Sin, however, never got what he desired at the right moment. Gradually, the blonde remembered several other disheartening moments in their life together that seemed wrong to him. The fact that Shi-yoon prioritized work over feelings in his partner, and that he never spoke of love, even managing to argue with him over differing views. Pondering this, Taesung suddenly felt strange. At that moment, the doctor finally finished work and was ready to go home together. The man immediately noticed the athlete's downcast mood and tried to inquire about it. Racer Sin decided not to hide his doubts and honestly shared what had been troubling him for some time. Suddenly, the brunette suggested they break up. Instead of supporting his partner, he asked him not to worry needlessly and to part ways. The suggestion shocked the blonde deeply as he sincerely loved the protagonist. Nevertheless, he hesitated for a moment before continuing the conversation. He wanted to know if the man truly wanted to break up with him. Shi-yoon confirmed, smiling as if it were a trivial matter, showing apparent indifference to his lover's feelings. At first, the young man couldn't believe if the doctor's statement was genuine. He tried to persuade him not to joke so cruelly. However, it soon became evident that all the man's words were not lies. He was more than serious. Without ever knowing the protagonist's true feelings, Racer Sin was left all alone. The brunette calmly walked away, never to see him again. 3 years later, at the next motorcycle race, all the fans joyfully welcomed one of the greatest athletes, Yuna. She carried herself with great confidence on her motorcycle and soon began conversing with her lover. Chadawan was slightly angry at the girl for riding too fast as he couldn't keep up with her. The event's spectators, watching the two athletes, were very surprised by their close interaction, as rumors had recently spread that the couple was dating. Now the young couple was proving to everyone that the rumors were true. They behaved like genuine partners. Meanwhile, a group of racers, including Taesung, along with close friends and fans, were having fun and drinking nearby. The young man had already heard the couple's arrival at the celebration, recognizing the sound of their motorcycles from afar, having helped repair them before. His friend, however, did not believe the rumors, and so the boys made a bet. Moments later, the lovers arrived at the party, proving the blonde's point. As they greeted friends, Racer Sin suddenly noticed a brunette standing in the crowd behind them. He was very surprised, as the protagonist was entirely to his taste. Clearly, he decided not to waste time and personally introduce himself. Handing his drink to a friend, the athlete quickly left the group to speak with the doctor. He seemed quite interested in the attractive man. Soon, Taesung managed to catch up with the man in the crowd and took his hand. He immediately suggested they get to know each other, perhaps even spend the evening together. However, when Shi-yoon turned to face him, he instantly recognized him, having been in a romantic relationship with him 3 years prior. But when the brunette called his former partner by name, he looked quite surprised, as if he hadn't known the identity of his former beloved at all. The protagonist was furious, noticing Racer Sin's strange behavior, mistakenly thinking he was being mocked. The young man, completely confused, had no idea what was happening and was genuinely surprised by the situation. He tried to clarify everything directly, confessing his intentions to get acquainted with the brunette for the sake of a pleasant evening together. However, despite the blonde's honesty, Shi-yoon did not believe him, continuing to think that the athlete was seeking revenge for their breakup 3 years ago. Failing to resolve the misunderstanding, he walked away, leaving Taesung bewildered and alone. Turning the corner, the protagonist pondered why he had come to the race, knowing in advance that the meeting with the young man would not go well. Several months earlier, the brunette had been preparing for a conversation with his boss. He was angry, and another employee tried to calm him down. Despite his colleague's efforts, he couldn't make the man behave restrainedly during the meeting with the supervisor. Therefore, Shi-yoon resolutely entered the boss's office and began interrogating him. He wanted to know why the boss had stolen his research paper and published it under his own name. Though the supervisor tried to resolve the situation with a skillful lie, claiming it was a ridiculous accident, the protagonist did not believe him. Unable to contain his emotions, the doctor struck his boss across the face. A while after this, the brunette was not only fired but also had rumors spread about his incompetence as an employee. None of the other clinic workers could believe it, knowing how diligent and talented Shi-yoon was. Nevertheless, the gossip destroyed the man's career, as his action against the boss ensured that he would not be hired by any other hospital. When the brunette was in despair over losing his job, he unexpectedly received a call from the blonde's friends who worked at the races. Upon learning that the protagonist had lost his position, they offered him a job in their organization. The sports competition leaders were aware of the man's professionalism, so they couldn't miss the chance to recruit him. The man was astonished by the offer, but thanks to the mention of his former lover, Shi-yoon agreed to accept it. Now, a few days after the incident at the party, the doctor couldn't forget Taesung's behavior. He couldn't understand why the young man had decided to take revenge in such a way. The incident upset him, making him regret his decision to work at the races. Soon, the man was attending to a patient, a young athlete who had been shot during one of his side jobs. Before starting treatment, the protagonist tried to scold the wounded man for recklessly risking his life. The boy had a different opinion, as he desperately needed the money he earned from the job. Therefore, he tried in every way to defend it and justify his efforts. The doctor partially understood his feelings, though he remained adamant. Immediately after the conversation, he proceeded with the surgery. In due time, Shi-yoon effortlessly extracted the bullet from the patient's open wound and even treated it. At the end of the treatment, he informed the boy that he was lucky, as the bullet had not hit any vital organs or crucial muscles. The young athlete was glad to hear this, but was more interested in knowing when he could return to work. Hoping he could start the next day, the doctor disappointed him with the truth. The man stated that he would need several months to recover. This news shocked the boy, so he tried to ask the protagonist what would happen if he broke the recovery period. He explained that he needed to work hard to earn money for his younger brother, who needed it. Shi-yoon categorically forbade him from working further, as otherwise, the patient could lose the ability to move his arm. The young athlete was disheartened, but the doctor tried to encourage him. He said that he too had been working hard for a loved one for a long time and knew the importance of taking care of oneself. For if one didn't, it could cause great worry and anxiety for that loved one. Before saying goodbye to the patient, the protagonist tried to ask him about his former lover. It turned out that Racer Sin was now not just a renowned athlete, but also the young leader of the entire organization. Moreover, Taesung was the son of the chief executive, the company director. This news astonished the brunette. However, he was soon even more surprised when the patient told him that recently, the blonde had been in the local hospital himself. The concerned man wanted to know more about this, as he was very worried about his former partner. Unfortunately, the racer couldn't provide details, being a newcomer and thus unaware of everything. A little later, when the patient had left the medical office and Shi-yoon was alone, only then could he express his true feelings. Of course, the doctor was troubled by what had happened to the blonde and how he had lived for those 3 years without him. On another evening at the races, while the crowd of fans watched the event with interest, Taesung was completely preoccupied. He was focused on his own thoughts regarding the recent encounter with the protagonist, unable to understand why he was met with such hostility. Racer Sin was convinced that he had done nothing wrong to the attractive man, and thus was very angry at the sudden injustice. Suddenly, a friend approached him. Noticing his excessive agitation, he immediately guessed that the blonde had serious problems with the person he fancied and offered to help. Taesung was glad to receive support, so he immediately described the doctor's appearance and his pleasant emotions from meeting him. As he spoke about it, the young man pondered the strange feeling he had experienced when touching the protagonist's hand earlier. It felt as if he had done it before. The athlete's friend reacted negatively to everything he heard, though he tried to hide his true emotions. Instead of responding to Racer Sin's concerns, he simply distracted him with other matters, seemingly unwilling to discuss Shi-yoon. Nevertheless, the young man did not intend to stop, and even on his way to the company, he sought advice from a friend online. The friend supported him with an article on how to make someone fall in love with you. That evening, the protagonist nervously paced around his apartment. He couldn't forget the information he had heard earlier from the patient, and this caused him great anxiety. In the end, the brunette also asked a friend for help. He kindly provided him with the phone number of the popular racer An Yuna, who was part of his ex-lover's company. Without much thought, the man decided to call the girl immediately. He wanted to learn the details of the tragedy involving Taesung, which had caused him to stay in the hospital for a long time. However, when Shi-yoon called her and introduced himself, the beauty abruptly ended the conversation, as if she didn't want to talk to him. This seemed strange to the doctor, as previously, when he was in a relationship with the blonde, he had interacted with her, albeit not closely, but quite amicably. Completely unable to understand what was happening, the protagonist became very upset and immersed himself in thoughts about everything. Suddenly, the brunette remembered one of his first encounters with Racer Sin, which had occurred 4 years ago in the hospital where he had worked until recently. At that time, he was trying to rest during yet another overtime shift, as he was severely sleep-deprived. However, he couldn't manage to do so, as he was urgently needed in the emergency department. Deciding not to waste time, the doctor hurried to work. Taesung was already waiting for him in the ward. He had been brought in critical condition after a serious accident. The young man had lost consciousness due to numerous bruises and severe bleeding. The protagonist already had a negative attitude toward this sport, as it could have cost the blonde his life. Despite this, he decided to help Racer Sin survive, meticulously examining all his wounds and bruises before ordering the preparation of the operating room. During the examination of the body for injuries, the brunette managed to understand how all the traumas were sustained, vividly imagining the accident. Given the severity of the incident, Shi-yoon realized at that moment that the young man was incredibly lucky to have survived such an ordeal. While Taesung's fate hung in the balance, a nurse revealed that the patient had previously requested a change of attending physician. In the past, The athlete had often been involved in accidents, and the protagonist had always treated him with extreme severity. Despite the patient's request, the man forbade transferring him to another specialist. After some time, when the surgery was over and the brunette was examining the young man's internal organs using an ultrasound machine, he unexpectedly woke up. The blonde immediately frowned, not wanting to be under the care of such a strict doctor again. Nevertheless, Shi-yoon was somewhat pleased by this. Therefore, when the athlete began to resist and tried to get up, he asked him not to move and not to worry unnecessarily. Furthermore, the man assured him that he was the only staff member at the clinic who could take the best possible care of him. He promised to do so. After some time, Racer Sin still couldn't calm down and insisted on trying to get up, despite his wounds not being healed yet. The doctor intervened, attempting to persuade him not to do so. He behaved rudely and sternly, displaying his bad temper, even delving into personal topics. Noticing how the young man was struggling to rise, he asked if he truly intended to die like this. Naturally, Taesung was infuriated by what he heard. Since he had no intention of dying and didn't want to allow Shi-yoon to speak to him in such a manner, he refused to heed the doctor's words. The doctor, however, remained indifferent to this. The protagonist dutifully performed his job and took care of the patient, even if he didn't actually want to interact with him. During the wound inspection, it was clear that the two young men disliked each other from the start due to their vastly different personalities. When they discussed the injury, the blonde confessed that he wanted to take a shower, as he was tired of lying in one place doing nothing. The doctor tried to ignore what he heard, as he thought the prohibition on bathing was obvious given the patient's dangerous condition. Nevertheless, when the athlete irritably asked again, he realized that the truth wasn't clear to everyone. He had to explicitly forbid him from going to the shower. The refusal angered Racer Sin, but even more so did the doctor's explanation, who, deciding not to hide his opinion, called the patient foolish. Finally, the series of arguments between the two young men led to Taesung threatening to beat the man up once he got out of the hospital. Only upon hearing this did Shi-yoon condescendingly explain why he couldn't take a shower. Afterward, he asked a nurse to help the injured man with a sponge bath. A few days later, late at night in the hospital parking lot, when the protagonist was heading to his car, he encountered the blonde. The latter had deliberately waited there, hoping to voice all the negative thoughts he had earlier and seek revenge. Deciding not to waste time, the athlete swung his fist at the man to beat him. However, he failed as the brunette struck him first. Only then did Taesung admit that he had merely wanted to scare the doctor with his behavior, not actually hit him. Now, having been hit, he wanted to retaliate and thus seriously attacked the protagonist. Fortunately, the latter managed to dodge. Moreover, Shi-yoon decided to teach the unruly patient a lesson, so he grabbed his arm and threw him over his shoulder. Such actions by the brunette greatly displeased Racer Sin, as he didn't want to be humiliated in the hospital parking lot. So he hurried to stop him. To do this, the blonde grabbed the protagonist's shirt collar, pulling him close to threaten him. Unexpectedly, the buttons popped off, exposing Shi-yoon's torso to the athlete. The absurdity of the situation immediately quelled the young man's anger. Instead, he began examining the future partner's torso, surprisingly covered in various marks. The doctor felt uncomfortable in this situation, so he got angry and tried to leave as quickly as possible, forcing Taesung to release him. In the next moment, the man got into his car and drove away, listening to the candid jokes from the former patient. Sometime after this incident, when the blonde returned to the hospital, he overheard a conversation between the protagonist and the administration. He accidentally learned just how professional the brunette really was. Shi-yoon was arguing with the director about a patient who could have lost a limb if he hadn't acted without permission. Though he had saved someone from disability, the clinic director was unhappy, as the institution's reputation was paramount to him. In the end, the conversation ended very poorly, with the boss threatening the man with a reprimand for such antics. Racer Sin, watching this, was pleasantly surprised, as he had mistakenly thought the doctor was overly arrogant and self-confident. Only now did he realize that he had valid reasons for his behavior. Soon, when the protagonist exited the director's office and encountered the young man, he lied, claiming he had come specifically to meet him. The courteous words seemed suspicious to the brunette, so he tried to ignore them. Suddenly, Taesung stopped him with an invitation to spend the night together. This statement completely astonished the man, but he quickly declined. The athlete didn't plan to give up, as he was clearly seriously interested in Shi-yoon's personality. So he explained that he wanted to have dinner together. The stern surgeon refused again, not suspecting that in the future he would end up dating this young man. Now, recalling this with a smile, the protagonist realized he had lost too much by breaking up so harshly 3 years ago. For even after all this time, he couldn't shake off his romantic feelings for Racer Sin. Late at night, the protagonist fell asleep right in the midst of his reflections about his former lover. Suddenly, he was awakened by a phone call regarding his new job. He was urgently requested to come in, as a patient with a gunshot wound had arrived at the hospital. Despite his exhaustion, the man had to agree, so he quickly headed to the hospital affiliated with the sports organization. Before leaving the apartment, the brunette noticed a personal message from Racer Sin, who persistently wanted to meet him again. In the message, the blonde invited the protagonist for a drink that evening, and soon they were sitting next to each other in a bar. Shi-yoon immediately began drinking, which seemed strange to the athlete, so he suggested that he take it slow. It turned out that Taesung was worried about the doctor, who seemed very tired. Learning this, the man confessed that he was indeed very overworked that day. But now that he was at the bar, he wanted to drink. This information seemed absurd to the young man, as in such a case, the brunette should have declined to go out instead of coming just to drink. It seemed the protagonist was already regretting agreeing to come. Gradually, thoughts about why he agreed in the first place began to trouble him. It seemed that Shi-yoon was starting to realize that his romantic feelings hadn't disappeared since their breakup. A little later, when the man finally got the drink he wanted, he suddenly asked how Taesung had gotten his number. Unexpectedly, the blonde stated that he had intentionally found a way to contact the attractive man through his own connections and acquaintances. Previously, he had indeed called the organization's employees and begged them for the phone number of their new doctor. Now, at a personal meeting with him, Racer Sin couldn't understand why he felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if they had met before. He sincerely had no idea about their past, so he persistently tried to question the brunette. The latter, in turn, skillfully avoided all questions about it. Suddenly, Taesung wanted to know how the man knew his name during their supposed first meeting at the recent party. Shi-yoon carefully redirected the conversation to another topic, clearly not planning to tell the young man the truth about everything. With such behavior, the protagonist greatly confused the interlocutor, making the athlete genuinely bewildered by everything happening now and in the past. Nevertheless, the young man continued his inquiries tirelessly, as he wanted to know the truth. In the end, the brunette tried to explain his behavior during their recent meeting by saying he had simply mistaken Racer Sin for an old acquaintance. It seemed the blonde could hardly believe this, so he attempted to establish a connection with the doctor by calling him by name. This moment made the protagonist shudder, as he hadn't heard his name from his former lover's lips for 3 years and missed it terribly. Taesung tried to conclude the serious conversation and instead start a lighter one. Moreover, he attempted to flirt humorously with the doctor. His behavior made Shi-yoon laugh. The man's smile was so beautiful that it embarrassed the blonde. During further conversation, it turned out that the protagonist knew the friend who had advised Racer Sin on such a method of seduction that appealed to him. Because of this fact, Taesung had even more doubts and questions, but the man prevented further discussion by lying. Surprisingly, the young man calmly believed the information he heard. While the brunette continued drinking, the blonde repeatedly said his name. He confessed that he really liked it because it seemed beautiful and very familiar. The protagonist, now very drunk, reacted sweetly to what was happening. Then Taesung decided not to waste time and boldly kissed the doctor first. Surprisingly, the stern and brash man was not against it. He didn't push Racer Sin away. Instead, he encouraged the kiss to last a bit longer. Moreover, when the kiss ended, Shi-yoon was the one who suggested continuing their time together in a more private place. The blonde eagerly agreed, though he was a bit taken aback by the man's unexpected boldness. To confirm his own confidence, he kissed him again. In that moment, the protagonist mentally realized that he had been deeply in love with the person next to him for a long time. Suddenly, the athlete's actions became more overt, and Shi-yoon had to stop him as they were in a public place. Reluctantly, Taesung paused for a moment, then suggested they move to the restroom to continue there.